Go, ready? I'd like to call the village board meeting for Tuesday, August 15, 2017 to order with roll call, please.
Kostler. Here. McAlpine.
Here.
Kraus.
Here.
Betts.
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Pavelli.
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now move to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. I don't have a list here. Does anybody want to adjust the village board or anything? No, that's right. No one here is saying anything, so we'll go ahead and close open.
No.
Oh, you want to say something? Oh, okay.
I'm Mark Guerra, been in this community 33 years. Okay, and I'm here to ask the board for help with a bad neighbor. And that neighbor is Kids Are Kids Daycare. Their construction workers are filthy in this, nice word, the street. And I've called numerous times to get help to get it cleaned up. They'll go out, they'll move the heavy stuff and they'll throw it on the people's property. They won't clean the road. Now, I understand construction, but in the 33 years I've lived here, I have never seen a construction firm that this village allowed to do this. And this has been going on for months. Now, bear in mind that the rain, I get it, wet, it's soggy, it's bad. But there's bases you can put down in that lot, which number one, would have benefited them by packing it in. Number two, it wouldn't have brought so much mud, rock, dirt, and everything else onto the roadway, the brand new roadway that was just put in. We have motorcycles up and down that road. We have bicyclists, teen bicyclists up and down that road, and it's filthy. These people need to be made to clean up after themselves. I don't mind anybody making a mess. But when you're done for the day, clean it up. So I'm asking this village, I've talked to Jake, he's talked to him numerous times. I want something imposed. I would like you guys to start finding them, do something where they will not ignore you on the weekends, on Friday night when no one's gonna check on them and hope that it rains and washes it away. It's terrible. It's absolutely disgusting. Now, early on, prior to it being built, I was told and under the impression during the process that the lighting was gonna be in such that it wasn't gonna be brighter than anything else in Cary, because it's standing out like a huge sore thumb with all their lights on. Is there some illumination law that don't we have in this community where it doesn't need to be, I mean, I want them to be safe, I want their establishment to be safe, but I mean, the light is just, I mean, we're killing this community, you can't see the stars anymore. So maybe they can do something with their lighting and keep themselves secure and yet at the same time not blind the community.
Okay. We'll check into those for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, we'll go ahead and close open forum again. I have a couple of proclamations. We added a new one for school opening, and I'd asked Trustee Kraus to read that one at the end. Our first one is for Constitution Week, whereas September 18th, 2017 marks the 230th anniversary of drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention, and whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize this magnificent document and the anniversary of its creation, and whereas it's fitting and proper to officially recognize the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate the occasion, and whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by President of the United States of America designating September 17th through the 24th as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, I, Mark Koenig, Mayor of the Village of Cary, do hereby proclaim September 18th through the 24th, 2017, to be Constitution Week in the Village of Cary, and ask our residents to reaffirm the ideals of the framers of the Constitution had in 1787, dated this 15th day of August, 2017. And a second one is National Hispanic Heritage Month 2017, whereas each year Americans observe National Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th through October 15th by celebrating the histories, cultures, and contributions of those whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, and the Caribbean and South America. And whereas the observation started in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson, and was expanded to Hispanic Heritage Month by President Ronald Reagan in 1988. And whereas Hispanics have had a profound and positive influence on our country through their strong commitment to family, hard work, service, and have enhanced the shape of our national character with centuries-old traditions and that reflect the multi-ethnic and multicultural customs of their communities. And whereas the cultural, educational, political influences of Hispanics in McHenry County and Illinois can be seen and appreciated in all aspects of our life, as Hispanics continue to be crucial to the cultural, economic, and political growth of our community. Now, therefore, I, Mark Kaunick, Mayor of the Village of Cary, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2017 is National Hispanic Heritage Month in the Village of Cary, dated this 15th day of August 2017. Trustee Krause?
Sure. Proclamation, Schools Open Safety Week, August 21st through the 25th, 2017. Whereas children in our community are beginning a new school year, and whereas students will be walking or biking to school in neighborhoods, on sidewalks and streets, approaching or waiting at school bus stops, and boarding or alighting from buses, and whereas motorists can help protect children by being especially careful near schools and in residential areas, watching their speed, observing traffic control devices, and obeying the Village of Cary crossing guards. And whereas it is important to increase all motorists' awareness of the need to be alert for children at school crossings, and whereas I encourage motorists to review and follow the rules of the road as they apply to school zones and school buses. Now, therefore, Mark Kaunick, the Mayor of the Village of Cary, does hereby proclaim August 21st through August 25th, 2017 as Schools Open Safety Week in the Village of Cary, and encourage all drivers to remember schools open and drive carefully. Sincere appreciation is expressed to all Village of Cary crossing guards for their committed public service, dated this 15th day of August 2017.
Thank you, Trustee Krause. Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items number 1, 3 through 7, and 9 and 10.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Betts,
Yes.
Kostler,
Yes.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus,
Yes.
McAlpine.
Yes.
Weinhammer.
Yes.
Thank you. And I will entertain a motion to approve the August 1st, 2017 Village Board meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I have a couple of notations about this. I think that it's not a good representation of what the dialogue was. I think there's a lot of editorializing going on. I will just speak to the items that mention my name. There was actually nothing wrong with what was being stricken. The board members were having their packets dropped off. This is on page 6 of 7. Board members who were having their packets dropped off either switched to either receiving them electronically or currently picking them up at Village Hall. That was part of the record. That was what we discussed. And then Trustee Weinhammer added, Kaunick initially stated no, he did not want village packet delivery to stop, and that was historically discovered. That asking Weinhammer how long she had lived in the village and how long she has been on the board, Kostler intervened, saying Kaunick's comments were demeaning. Kaunick changed his mind and said he had no problem with packet delivery. Weinhammer stated Kaunick's statements were 180 and is confusing and inconsistent in his comments. That's not factual. I never said I would not have the packets delivered, ever. At any time did I say that. In addition, if you're going to quote and be as determined to have every word in the minutes, Kostler interviewed saying Kaunick's comments were rude, not demeaning. So if we're going to be this particular about our minutes, then let's be particular.
You did say no. You
I did
shouted
not
at me
say-
and you said no initially. Yes, you did.
I did not. I listened to the tape a couple times. I never said
You
no.
did.
Well, that's not true. In the future, this is a complete waste of time for our staff. We have had conversations about having the minutes are kind of a synopsis of what has been saying. It's not verbatim. We have a tape, an audio tape. We have a videotape. If people want to go back, they can listen to that. I think that when things are added like this, I would prefer to have if we're going to be this verbatim about things, that I think that these edits need to be accompanied by the audio tape so that we can all be assured of that this was a factual statement. I think this is, there's other things that are in here that just aren't true either. So I just have some concerns, and I want to make sure that we get.
I would like to know what else isn't true.
Excuse me, may I finish, please?
Yes.
I would like to get some continuity with the village board with regards to these minutes. It's a critical part of our operation. We all have an opportunity to approve minutes and to edit as they see fit, but this continuously re-editing and editorializing these minutes isn't doing anybody any good. It takes an extraordinary amount of time for our staff to continuously redo these. I would like to come to some sort of a consensus as to what people want to see in the minutes. And the continuing of adding these additional minutes, I think, is counterproductive to what this board ultimately wants to do, is continue to move the village forward. That's my comment on that.
Go ahead.
I've told Jake, Administrator Rife, this from the beginning. The minutes are the minutes, and I think that any trustee or board member has the right to put something in there that was actually said. Aside from that, I'm okay with the minutes that the prior board, we agreed on, sort of reduced minutes because we had the video now. So, I'm fine with that practice, but if a board member would like to have something added that was stated at the meeting, I don't think there should be a pushback.
I have a question for the attorney. So what is the legal record or documentation of the minutes? Is it the video or is it the minutes here that are documented? If somebody wants to go back and look at it.
The board doesn't approve the video, certainly, so the video is a public record, and it's available for the public to inspect and watch and see what actually happened. The minutes are the official board-approved representation of what happened, but the fact that the minutes are approved, if there's extrinsic evidence of something else that happened, or extrinsic evidence of something that is contrary to what the minutes reflect, I think that would be, in the event that whatever's in the minutes is relevant to something in court, I don't think a court would exclude the videotape as evidence of what happened over the minutes. But obviously the board only approves the minutes. They don't approve the videotape.
I have a couple of things. I did ask for this to be pulled from the consent agenda because I don't feel that it's accurately reflecting everything that happened. And I do think that there's a little bit of, I don't want to use editorializing, but I think that some information is distorted a little bit. For example, on page 4, where it states down here that Trustee Weinhammer stated that the minutes would not have to be altered again if Trustee McAlpine didn't ask for them to be removed without board consent. I never asked for that. And Jake never said that, and I watched the video over and over again. The only thing I did was I contacted Jake and said I felt that we were getting way too much detail in these when we were supposed to be doing an overview. I never, and Jake, you can confirm this, did I ever say to you, here's specific things I want you to remove from what Trustee Weinhammer asked you to do? I did not, correct?
Correct.
So that's incorrect. That's just an incorrect reflection of what happened. The other thing is on page 6, and I don't know, did anybody here, I'm just curious, did anybody here view the video?
Yes.
Because I did. I watched it a couple of times also, just because I wanted to get an idea of what it was. Again, if we're looking at verbatim, on the second paragraph where it says trustee Weinhammer stated that she would like to discuss the practice of agenda packets being delivered to board members by police department. You never said the police department in the video. You said you would just like to discuss them being delivered to board members, period. The other thing is that I would agree with some of that Mayor Koenig was stating about some of the comments and things that it was not exactly verbatim. And when it's being this detailed, it just seems like we're getting a little bit stuck in the minutia of it. The idea of us going to this route, and I brought these for everyone, I pulled out, and we can all go back and Chris and Jen, you were not part of the board at that point, but you can go back and look at the Tuesday, July 21st minutes, and I highlighted on there, and maybe if I want to pass one down. What happened is we had a discussion at that point, and every single person that was on the board, Kim, Jim, Jeff, Rick, Dave, and myself, all agreed Administrator Clark asked if further written meeting notes could be condensed. The committee supported this request. My suggestion is everyone go back and view that, because everyone was in agreement with that. So I don't know why we're changing it up. I don't want to, it just thinks we're getting caught in the details. Another thing on page 6 was trustee Weinhammer asked for an update on the appointments to the public, to the police pension board and CPA that were not confirmed by the board. And that states Mayor Koenig stated they would serve as holdover appointments for the remainder of his current term. That is not true. That is not a true statement. That is not what he stated. So that's just not, that may be what you interpreted to me, but that's not what he stated. In fact, I believe his direct quote was, until I bring someone else forward. So I feel like we're spending way too much time on this type of thing. The reason that we went to condensed meeting notes, and again, please someone chime in if I'm misunderstanding this or if I'm incorrect, was we did that so that we could make these a little bit more condensed, so that it wasn't taking up so much time of our village staff. We have a very, very small village staff doing a lot of work. You know, and sometimes we say, why isn't this getting done or why isn't that getting done? There's a lot of time being spent on some of this. It's really just not necessary, but especially if it's not accurate information. That's a totally different spin on things when you look at in the verbiage on there. So I just, I don't feel comfortable with saying that those are accurate. I think we need to make accurate changes to those minutes if we want it that detailed. I personally would like us to have a discussion about how detailed do we want to have it? You know, where do we want to be with it? I agree with trustee Kossler. If someone wants something added, by all means, but it's got to be accurate. It can't be something where we're interpreting it a way that we want to interpret or how we want it to have come across when that's not accurate.
At the last meeting, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Are you saying that Jake did not confirm that you were the one who asked him to take things off?
Absolutely, but he didn't confirm that I said.
Wait, I'm confused. Did you say Jake did not say
No,
that you
what
were
I
the one?
said was that Jake did not say that I specifically asked for anything particular of yours to be removed. I simply said that I felt that the meeting notes were getting way too involved, that this was more than we wanted to have.
Jake initially said he wanted to combine and condense the combination of the trustees.
Sure.
And I asked specifically, I said, I want to know who asked
Right.
for my stuff to be removed.
I didn't
And he
ask
said-
for your stuff to be removed. I asked for things
He
to be
stated that-
condensed.
Well, I asked him that and that's what he answered me.
Trustee McAlpine had a different opinion of the comments, and so I tried to blend them to meet everyone's needs. Going forward, as we decided, I'll bring the comments forward and the village board can decide what you want to do with them.
Can I just say a couple things? We have a new board now, so as far as whatever happened in 2015, to me, this is kind of it's a good point to bring up, but it's not necessarily relevant right now to this board. So I would say if we have this big of a differing opinion, and we have a clerk who already said that they are actually going to do the minutes, which is one of the reasons why we wanted her as a clerk, because she actually said she was going to take time away from the staff. I say to avoid all this, we have complete and accurate everything, just put it all on the table, then there's no back and forth, there's no miscommunication, there's nothing, then we can avoid this altogether. That would be my recommendation.
Well, I think I would like to, I understand what you're saying. I appreciate that. But in the past, when a previous board initiates something, we continue with that until it's changed. So until we change that, we've got to be careful of how we do this. If the consensus of the board is to have a very detailed minutes, then I wonder then why do we have it videotaped? Why are we going to the expense to have it videotaped so that if there's going to be a written document, then why don't we just rely on the written document?
These are what we vote on. This is just like what Attorney Simon said, this is what we vote on, this is what we have as our official documentation. I think to avoid a lot of this, like this was said, I didn't mean this, here's what I meant, whatever the case may be, it's here, we have it, it's black and white, there's no confusion, and it ends this.
Yes.
Sounds like a good plan.
And the videotape is not there just to be a record of what happened. It's there so that residents of our village can watch live, like they're doing right now, and be informed on issues. So I don't think it was ever promoted to be the official record. It was for informing our residents about what is happening at the village board meetings.
Noted. So I think I'd like to move this conversation to a future, not too distant future, committee of the whole meeting so we can get an exact confirmation from the board as to what we want to do. Is that fair for everybody?
And just to clarify, the clerk is still doing the minutes, correct?
Correct. Yeah, she's had an unexpected medical
Okay.
leave, so that's why she's not here.
These last minutes, the clerk did not do the minutes.
Okay.
These were done by village staff.
All right, moving forward, please. I will entertain a motion to approve a resolution to
We
authorize.
got to vote on
Oh, I'm
this.
sorry.
So what we're saying right now is that
I'll move
We're
to
not gonna
table
amend
this
this?
motion.
I was just
if you
going to
wanna
say,
do-
could we table this or postpone this until this can be rectified?
I moved to table the motion till, I don't even know how to phrase that, Adam.
Postponing is indefinitely, correct?
Yeah.
Tabling is,
Let it be on the table until we figure
it's
it out.
postponed until we can remedy this.
We
So
should,
somebody
we should have,
removes it from
we
the
should have the
table.
minutes approved within 60 days of when the meeting was.
I
So
agree.
by the beginning of October, we should have the minutes approved, finally.
Okay. So we'll have these until the end of September. Is that okay with everybody?
yes.
All right,
So I'll second that.
We have amended motion, so I will roll call on the amended motion to postpone.
To table it.
Kostler,
Yes.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus,
Yes.
McAlpine.
Yes.
Weinhammer.
Yes.
Betts.
Yes.
Thank you. And one other that was pulled off is, I will entertain a motion to approve a resolution to authorize the village administrator to execute an extension of the agreement with Andy Frayne Services, Aurora, Illinois, for school crossing guard services with self-renewing provisions.
So moved.
Second.
Hello, Chief.
Hello. I'm only here to answer questions in regards to this resolution. I will tell you that we use,
I asked for this to be pulled. So
Exactly.
what I really wanted to do is foster some conversation on this in light of the deficit we have in the village right now and the fact that we are actually partially paying for services that more or less should be attributed to District 26. My understanding is the history of, and let me make it clear for everybody out there, we're voting about funding crossing guards, school crossing guards, and the village pays basically half of the funds to fund crossing guards. I am not against crossing guards. I want our crossing guards. In fact, I think they have been accepted. Our new service has been reviewed pretty well, right, Jake?
yes,
Absolutely.
and it relieves a burden on our staff to, number one, recruit the crossing guards, because that was a very difficult thing to do, number one. But number two, the supervision as it relates to making sure that those positions are staffed. Occasionally, we'll have to put somebody at a position because someone's sick or they couldn't get someone to fill in. But that is the exception, not the rule any longer.
Right. And I don't have an issue with our officers filling in. I think that's needed. It's a safety issue, and they need to fill in if there isn't a guard that's available. But what I wanted to get back to is the funding, and that's what we're talking about here, the funding and who's paying for the crossing guards. And my understanding of state statute is it was changed in 2009. Prior to 2009, municipalities were required to provide funding for crossing guards. After 2009, state statutes were changed that basically say we can, but it's not mandatory. So
I don't recall that. I will tell you that school code allows for schools to expend funds on traffic-related issues such as crossing guards, but I don't recall that the municipality had an obligation or requirement to provide those crossing guards. And that comes from my background prior to being, appointed in the Village of Cary.
I look at it here as kind of a partnership between the village and the school district, similar in other areas where this is debated of who should be paying for it, the municipality or the school district. What we were getting, and the chief mentioned it here earlier, we were getting jammed up before is because it was hard for us to find crossing guards. And we continuously were putting out ads. And in that situation then too, that's when we have the officers going out there and then we're paying for overtime. This has been a lot more efficient. Standards of
Understand that.
supervision
And I'm not
as well.
debating the merits of the program. I think it's worked out well for us and it's good and I want it to continue. My point is we're facing a $700,000 deficit and we're paying half for something that should be District 26 responsibility. Now, if you look, you can easily Google search it. A lot of towns and cities across Illinois are doing what I'm suggesting right now. They're taking the burden back onto the school district for this funding instead of the village footing the bill. And I think that is something we should seriously consider in light of our precarious financial state next year. You may say it's only $12,000, but every dollar counts. And this is something that my understanding is the school board is receptive of paying for.
I can't speak to that part.
Yeah, I understand.
Do you want to talk about what Brian Coleman about splitting the bill? Because we hadn't split the bill in the past, have we?
I think it is
Yeah,
currently
we-
split 12 and 12.
We are going to split the
Yeah.
bill going forward. Yeah, absolutely.
I think what Trustee Costner's asking is, can you talk to the school about paying for the whole bill in light of the
I've talked
deficit
to
we're
them
facing?
previously about that and they're not interested in it.
So if we don't pay for half, they won't hire crossing guards?
They just said that they're not interested in taking the full contract over.
Well, come on.
I'm just telling you what the superintendent has stated.
They tax at a rate that's 4 times more than we do, okay? There has to be a line drawn somewhere where we don't have the funds for this, and they do. So you can't just say, hey, we're going to pay it.
What would happen if we said we're not going to pay it? What would happen?
If we said we weren't going to pay it, we wouldn't
Right.
extend the contract, and the contract would expire, and there would be no crossing guard services unless the village found volunteers or manned it with police officers. If the school district could hire them, they'd have to go through a procurement process to do that, which would probably delay them hiring crossing guards for several weeks, at the very least. So those are the alternatives.
Like I had mentioned before, I just look at this as, it's a partnership here with the school district. I mean, I understand the costs, but when you look at the overall costs and the big picture here, every penny counts. This isn't a significant expense here for the partnership. I think the partnership goes a long ways. I mean, we work with them on a lot of items here. And to be able to have that partnership and maintain that partnership, I think that's what's important here.
And we do have funds set aside in the budget for these services for this year.
I was going to bring that up too. Yeah, I think this would be something I'd be willing to look at, Trustee Kozler, during the next budget cycle. I've always had questions about the high school
Resource
officer. I've always questioned why are we responsible for that if they want to utilize one of our officers up there. So I do have some reservations in regards to what we fund and what the school district would be responsible for.
And they do pay for a portion of that.
Correct. I feel that at this point, though, it's a little too late in the game. I feel like we'd be pulling the rug out from under them at this point.
I do. I agree also, and I understand what Trustee Kozler's coming up with, because I have the exact same notes down. It's like, who's paying the full? Why are we doing this? I mean, these are things that we need to be looking at. But I think that what we do is we're proactive now, and we say, here's what we need to do moving forward. But I think at this juncture, we're going to be starting school here in a week. I don't want us to be in a position, I don't want something to happen where there aren't crossing guards in place where they need to be.
I don't want that to happen either.
No, I know you don't.
And, you know, that sort of relates to why we're voting on this when school starts this week. So there's a little beef of mine as well. But
And this resolution and the agreement or the extension to this contract allows us to provide written notice to them 30 days before the end of this contract if we want to, you know, it's a 30-day out, basically, if we don't want to renew that contract. So it does give us a provision or an ability to do that.
Well, I think it's important, Jake, that you let the superintendent know what this board is thinking at this point moving forward so that perhaps they can plan accordingly also.
Oh, absolutely. I will. I'm sure that I'll hear kind of the similar message too from the superintendent. I mean, you've seen a lot through the state budget process here. I mean, they're concerned about their funding too. So they're having very similar discussions that we're having here. How are we going to be able to pay for things long term?
And I'd like to have some ability to research the statute because as I recall, it was a little bit differently than how, you know, you portrayed it. And it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I just don't recall it that way.
yeah, that's fine. All right.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this? Roll call, please.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Betts,
Yes.
Kostler.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving to items for separate action, I will entertain a motion to approve a resolution awarding the wastewater treatment plant Phase 1 improvement construction bid to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Manuso's General Contracting Incorporated, Fox Lake, Illinois, in the amount not to exceed $2,654,000 to adopt a resolution authorizing the village administrator to execute a contract with Manuso's General Contracting Incorporated.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? We've talked about this in the past. Is there any new questions for Director Morimoto with regards to this?
No.
Again, another gift from our state on mandates. Roll call, please.
Kraus,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Betts,
Yes.
Kostler,
Yes.
Cavelli.
Yes.
Thank you. And then I will entertain a motion to approve a resolution authorizing the village administrator to execute an engineering services agreement with Christopher B. Burke Engineering Limited, Rosemont, Illinois, in the amount not to exceed $30,300 for work associated with the village-wide analysis of reported drainage problems, and authorizing the village administrator to approve a 10% contingency for unforeseen charges in a scope for a maximum project budget of $33,330.
So moved.
Second.
Eric, do you want to kind of give us a high-level view of what's going on with this?
Certainly. As everyone's aware, the month of June and July resulted in a significant rainfall events in the area. As noted in the packet here, the typical rainfalls that occur in this area are between 6 and 7 inches of rain in those 2-month spans. We've actually experienced ourselves in Cary almost 17 inches of rain. July in particular, with 2 or 3 different events, had very high intensities that resulted in some drainage impacts, not only on the Fox River, like many other communities in the area experienced, but also on other roadways and residential properties. In all, the village received about 24 reports of different issues of varying degrees, some standing water, some active sump pumps, other surface water issues. Staff has met with all those residents and did some data collection, as well as some of the research involved in order to establish the next steps in the hopes to provide some improvements and future direction for these issues. In order to do that, and also to take into consideration the amount of staff time available to make these analyses and recommendations, the village is recommending that a consultant be utilized to prepare a village-wide analysis of these drainage problems. Christopher Burke Engineering is currently one of our on-call engineering consultants that was recently included in the last renewal for this term. They have also been the village's stormwater consultant since 2014, when Cary became a certified consultant under the McHenry County Stormwater Commission. Their proposal includes the analysis of all 24 reported areas of drainage issues, as well as some other locations that staff has observed and identified from historical observations as well as what was experienced in July. The proposal and scope of services includes additional data collection, drainage area sub-basin mapping, which would be a tool that could be used not just by the consultant, but also by staff to show on a mapping basis through our GIS the actual drainage areas that are tributary to each location in the village. In addition to that, the third item in the scope was the analysis of the different flood problem areas. So they would look at each location, determine the probable cause of the drainage issues, identify different potential conceptual solutions, and then also provide conceptual cost estimates, which then could be utilized by staff to incorporate into our future capital improvement planning and then budgeting. Fourth would be the hydraulic and hydrologic modeling for the First Street drainage system. Many of the reported locations of issues from the July storms happen to be tributary to the main trunk sewer along First Street from the storm system. So in order to identify the scale and the scope of the different improvements that might be necessary, some additional engineering modeling is needed, and this would be accomplished through the scope of services here. And then finally, a summary report, which will then be part of our documentation that will be utilized in the budget process. Burke Engineering has done this type of village-wide analysis for other communities, and they are actively doing it for these communities now as a result of these July storms. Some of the past experience they've had in this type of work was done with Hawthorne Woods, Crystal Lake, Libertyville, and Buffalo Grove. And if the board has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I think it should be worth noting here too, this expense isn't budgeted. We didn't plan for this. Consider this more of an emergency expense. And if we don't approve it here, then this type of work will continue and we'd have to look at it through the next budget year. We wouldn't be able to discuss those projects till the following year through the capital plan. This will allow us to get the information, talk about these projects within our 5-year capital plan, see where we want to insert them and see what makes sense to do. So I just wanted to note that for the village board.
Any questions for Director Morimoto or staff?
Eric, are all these things necessary? I mean, and when I say necessary, what level are you taking this to examine the problem? It can be different amounts of money spent on it.
Certainly. In our negotiation of the scope and the cost with Burke Engineering, we made a specific point to keep the analysis as high level as possible while still giving us enough information to provide a very thoughtful and appropriate ranking when we go into the budget process. There are additional levels of study that could be done at varying degrees. We have the First Street drainage system, for example, we have one instance in the scope of some hydraulic and hydrologic modeling. Really, that could be done for every single location, but obviously at a very significant cost. So we felt based on just existing data and plans and engineering judgment that we should be able to handle most of those locations without going to that expense at this time, depending on the ranking and the direction we receive through the budget process and different projects. That type of additional preliminary engineering will probably be needed and then done at that time. But just given the fact that this is a kind of an emergency expense and unbudgeted, we did make sure that we excluded as many of the other higher level and more expensive engineering facets that we could, while still giving it, making it a quality report and worth the obvious effort and time that we would devote to it.
Any other discussion, questions? Roll call, please.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Betts,
Yes.
Kostler,
Yes.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus.
Yes.
Thank you. Administrator's report. Jacob, you got something for us?
Just one quick reminder, we will have a Maplewood meeting here with the developer next week, Tuesday, 6 p.m. in this room. Opportunity to hear from residents, any questions that you have, and also an opportunity to hear from the developer. And the village board will also have a chance to ask any questions that they have of the developer. So that's the only update that I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question with regard to that. I know we don't know how many people are going to be here, but do you anticipate, and I know I sent you an email, but I just talked to a resident right before the meeting too, who had a concern with the space available for the Maplewood meeting.
Yeah, right now we're planning to have it here at Village Hall.
Okay.
If we have significant overflow and we need to, move the meeting, we can move the meeting to a future date. I haven't heard any information that states that we're going to have a significant turnout here. We're able to seat about 50 and the room, holds 75 to 100. So I think we're going to be able to accommodate it.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, you have anything for us?
Trustee Kraus stole my thunder in regards to opening the school.
Drive safe.
Yes.
Director Morimoto, nothing? Okay. Any future agenda items and discussion by village board?
I have some questions. So with regard to social media, I was wondering, Mayor, do you run your own Facebook page, or is that something that somebody else runs?
I run my own Facebook page.
Okay. Because on April 2nd, 2017, you had posted an article written by one of the holdover appointments to the Daily Herald, letter to the editor, and you had stated in executive session that you did not know that that letter was written endorsing you, Betts, Nats, and Dudek, and I was just curious on why you stated that.
Well, because at that particular time, I had a consulting group that was running my campaign that was managing that. If you've noticed, there's nothing been added since there. I don't go on social media.
So when your campaign puts something online, you don't see it? You don't look at it?
I didn't, no.
I find that odd, but okay. With regard to you and Jake speaking, I spoke to Jake after the meeting at National Night Out 2 times ago, or on 2 separate occasions, asking if he had a conversation with you about the text that Jeff received from one of the holdover appointments. Jake stated both times that he did speak with you about the text between you and Jeff. You had said that, no, you didn't know about the text between Jeff.
I didn't know anything about what was said. That's what I was referring to. I wasn't aware of the conversation. I did not talk to Trustee Kraus. So at that particular time, I had I knew that there was something going on, but I didn't know what the content was.
So Jake, did you tell me on 2 separate days and 2 separate occasions when I asked if you had had a conversation with Mayor Koenig about the text with Jeff, did you say to me both times, twice, yes, you and the mayor had a conversation with regard to the text, he was aware of them?
I don't remember my specific discussion with the mayor, and I don't remember going back to the discussion with you. I know that, you and I had talked about it, and I believe that I informed the mayor about that I received a text from Jeff.
And did you explain to him what the conversation was, or you just said, hey, I got a text from Jeff?
No, I told him what it was regarding. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you were aware that...
But Jeff, where are you going with this? I didn't know what the conversation
I am questioning,
was.
too, why is this being brought up? This was an issue I had with another village official in the community. And I made the mistake of having a conversation with you about it. And you've turned it into a witch hunt. And I can't believe we're sitting here continuing. First it's the minutes, and now it's this. Give me a break.
I'm just actually trying to figure out why Mark has misinformed us once with the Daily Herald letter to the editor, and then twice saying that he had spoken to Jake, but he hasn't spoken to Jake.
Jennifer, if you've got a beef about something that I've done, why don't you talk to me about it? Why do you feel the need to drag this through and waste our staff's time, waste the rest of the
Because
board's
this
time?
is important to the public.
How is this important to the public?
I shouldn't have to hide that, you're misinforming us with regard to the letter to the editor, or to the
I
Daily
had no
Herald.
control over that. I had a campaign manager doing everything. If you look
You
on
had
my...
your campaign manager running your campaign, you didn't do anything.
I did nothing. No, I did. Jennifer, I have a full-time job, plus I'm the mayor of this community. I had no time to do anything. So I hired a campaign manager that took it over. And if you look at it, I have not added anything. Our association ended the night of my campaign. It's done. At the election, they have not contributed anything. It might have been something a day after, but I don't look at that at all. I don't go on social media. I don't find it relevant to what for me, I find a lot of it very disturbing, and people I feel are misinformed. So I don't go on it. I don't spend my time doing it.
So you didn't have to review what was put on your Facebook page.
No, I had other people helping me do that.
And then, you said you have a full-time job. Your business being registered, you've misinformed us in the past with regard to that too. So I just feel like it's constant misinformation.
This is
Jennifer,
way out of line,
this is
Jennifer.
so out of
This is
line.
out of line.
You are so off base, and it's insulting that you would continuously bring this up. Do you have any idea what I'm going through right now to reconfigure these things? There's a lot more to it than you think.
You don't know an explanation, Mark.
This is a ridiculous conversation to have at the board
That's
level.
very disrespectful to everybody here. Everyone on this board should say this is disrespectful, because you know what?
I
Hold
think
on a
she's
minute, Kim.
trying to
Kim,
find
hold on a minute.
answers,
I'm
is what she's
speaking.
trying to
Kim,
do,
I'm
is to
speaking,
find
though.
answers,
But
and
I'm
she's not
speaking,
getting
Kim.
them.
Please,
Kim, there's
She's
not a
getting
problem.
different
please,
answers.
please.
Kim, the bottom line is when somebody does something that someone finds is inappropriate, Jim, you've always been very quick to jump in and let them know. Does nobody, and Kim, you have too, do you guys not find this inappropriate?
I find her trying to find answers, and I don't have a problem if she's trying to find answers. If she's getting different answers from different people and she's trying to find the right answer, I have no problem with that. I wish she already had the right answer, so she wouldn't even have to bring
Well,
this
how
up
about she
right now.
talk to how about she have a conversation with the mayor?
Because she's getting different answers. That's what she's saying, and that's what she's trying to clarify.
Are you meeting with the mayor and you're getting different answers from him, Jennifer?
We discussed this in executive session. I get one answer from him. I speak to Jake. I get a different answer from Jake.
I just think this is an inappropriate forum, and I think that it's inappropriate to be attacking in this manner.
I'm not attacking. I'm just asking
That's how
for
I feel about
clarification
it.
on things that were
Jennifer, do you have
stated.
anything else relevant to the village board about future business?
Did you get your answers?
No, I didn't get my answers again.
But I think they were answered.
Were they? There was 2 different answers I heard, so.
It's still answers.
Is there anything else, Trustee Weinhammer, that you'd like to contribute to this?
No.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're going to roll right into the committee of the whole.
We don't have to take those.
Yeah.
Try to get his attention as you're ready.
Give him a second here.
Nada.
We're requeuing the video. We're good to go, okay. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, August 15, 2017, to order with roll call, please.
Kostler. Here. McAlpine.
Here.
Kraus.
Here.
Betts.
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Cavelli.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now move to the public comment portion. Is there anybody here that'd like to address the Committee of the Whole on anything? We have nobody sign in, so that's a start. Thank you. And I'm going to turn this over to Jacob and Michael to have a discussion regarding our fiscal year 2018-2019 budget.
Thanks, Mayor. Just give a quick update here to the village board before I turn it over to Finance Director Descharme. We had discussed through our village board orientation here some potential new revenue sources. At the time that we had that discussion, the village board had asked for some additional information related to those new revenue sources. We've gathered that information, included in the packet. We've also had some new information here come through the state budget related to LGDF, Local Government Distributive Fund. Mike's going to go over that along with these new revenue sources. Would like to get some feedback here from the village board regarding these new revenue sources as it relates to our projected budget deficit for next year. So I'll turn it over to Finance Director Descharme to lead our discussion, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
As we have discussed on more than one occasion, we had projected as early as our budget discussion a deficit for next year of approximately $550,000. With the recent approval of the state's budget, we were informed that the income tax, or the LGDF, that they distribute to us on a monthly basis would be reduced by 10%. Income tax in the village of Cary in total generates $1,850,000. 10% of it, $185,000. I'm showing a lesser amount just because the state's budget runs from July 1 to June 30th. Our fiscal year runs from May 1st to April 30th. So it wouldn't be a full impact of the state's budget, but still a significant number here in the village of Cary. And that's why we're talking about it tonight. When you get up to a sum of approximately $700,000, it's hard to generate new revenue sources to make up that hole. But it's equally difficult to reduce $700,000 from an operating budget. Village's general fund budget is slightly over $8 million. 75% of that budget's made up of salaries and benefits. Probably another 10% at least is made up of contractual agreements. So basically, from the balance of that, 15% is the first place you'd go to look to try and reduce the $700,000 we're looking for. 700,000 is a pretty large number for that. Because Cary's a non-home rule community, which means we're subject to property tax caps, there are very few new revenue sources that we can implement. I've listed a few of them, or all of them that I am aware of at this point in time, that we could consider to try and reduce the $700,000 deficit we're looking at. First one that's listed on the list is a natural gas utility tax. The village, as a non-home rule community, does have the ability to impose that tax up to 5%. Based on revenue numbers or numbers we've received from NICOR, we would estimate that tax could generate, if we imposed it at a rate of 5%, approximately $200,000. Next one I have on my list is an eating establishment tax. Eating establishment tax is a tax that is allowed for non-home rule communities. You could compare it to a food and beverage tax that you would see in other home rule communities. In total, it would generate about $150,000, and that's based on numbers I've looked at in terms of sales tax being generated from our restaurants in town. It would not apply to all of our restaurants. It would only apply to those that have seating within the restaurant. A restaurant that you'd walk in, order a pizza, and carry it out of there could not be subject to an eating establishment tax. The other thing that's a little different about this is it is a tax where we would have to register all of the businesses. We would register them every month. They would fill out a monthly tax return, remit it to the village of Cary. We would collect their tax, and in the event they did not pay it, we would have to go out and collect that tax. I am familiar with that process, and it can be quite an administrative process at times to attempt to collect that on a regular basis. And again, it is something that you would have to do on a regular basis because you can't expect some people to have to pay it and other people not to. The other part that makes it a little difficult, it is a tax they generally collected from their patrons who come in. So it's not even a tax that they're necessarily paying directly. It's more or less a pass-through tax. Next one that's on the list is to increase the cable franchise fee. Originally, or dating back maybe a year and a half, we used to have a 5% franchise fee with Comcast. When we considered adding AT&T and the U-verse franchise fee to that, the decision was made to lower the total tax rate from 5% to 4%. We could, if we chose to, increase that 4% tax back to 5% for both Comcast and AT&T, and it would generate $60,000. Last two on the list are are pretty much housekeeping issues, I think. Well, increased license and permits fee would be housekeeping. It's probably been some time. I don't know that all of those permit and license fees have been increased since I've been here at the Village of Cary. So for 3 or 4 years, I don't think they've increased. We'd have to pretty much go out and do a survey of local communities around us, see what their license and permit fees are, bring that information back to the village board, and see if you would be interested in adjusting those. Last on my list is to increase property taxes through the new growth. I understand the feeling of the board members related to increasing property taxes to the residents of Cary. What we're talking about here is increasing the village's tax levy based on the new growth, new development coming into the community. That new growth is being paid for those new businesses as they come into town. We have one chance, and we've had this discussion before, that in the year when that new business is added to the tax rolls, that based on that increase in assessed valuation, we can take that increase and apply it to our tax levy, and it would not be subject to the tax caps that we're normally subject to. The reason it's important, or at least important to talk to about this time, is we've had some pretty significant projects lately in the Village of Cary. Apartment complex came in. Hopefully that'll be hitting the tax rolls. The call's already been placed to the Algonquin Township Assessor to try and get that value that hopefully we'll see as new growth this year. Second one coming on, or that we know about, is the Sage expansion. Isn't completed yet. From a discussion I had with the Township Assessor, did not appear that that project would hit the tax rolls for this year. So we wouldn't see that as new growth. There may be a couple other projects that are in the future. The Pearl project, I think they're waiting for their financing to come through. If that were to come through, that's another significant project that I know I'd be watching for. The total of those may help us. By no means am I attempting to say that they're going to solve this problem. And that's pretty much why we're talking about it tonight, because it takes time to put all of these things in place, or those things you're in favor of, to provide us the opportunity to start collecting it, to try and offset that deficit before the budget gets approved next year. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that any of the board members have.
So before we get into questions too, the exhibit here, if the board has had a chance to look at it, it illustrates the NICOR natural gas utility tax. So all communities that have that tax, and then also the history of the tax. Communities around us, Algonquin, Barrington, Barrington Hills, Johnsburg, Island Lake, Lake Barrington, Marengo, the Round Lake communities have it as well. There aren't many locations that have the eating establishment tax. Eating establishment tax isn't a tax that I would recommend, and as I've discussed previously with the village board, that from an economic development perspective, there is some concern about that. Additionally, the administration of that, you heard Finance Director Descharmes talk about, if folks aren't paying, we have to do something about that. That becomes somewhat of an administrative nightmare. And so that's the general feedback here from staff as far as these new revenue sources and new options. And again, we're happy to take any questions that you have regarding this.
Mike, you just included the new growth in the levy. What about the levy, just if we increase the levy itself, would that be about $40,000?
Well, if I used it as using historical numbers for the past couple of years, the amount that we'd be able to increase our levy would probably represent a number anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000, possibly $50,000 at the highest, because pretty much we're limited to the growth related to CPI. And although it's been rising a little, it's still not a significant number in terms of our overall levy.
I'd like that on the list.
Oh,
to be
sure.
included
We
next
would
time.
always, The only reason it wasn't on the list is I know how that conversation has gone in the past.
I think you might need to take a look at that in the future.
So just to elaborate a little bit on the new growth.
Sure.
So if you don't capture it, I just want to make sure from an educational standpoint, if we don't capture it that initial year, what happens the following year?
Even though the village's assessed value would go up, which is the value, the tax value of that business, if we did not capture it in the first year, we would not be able to consider it in the second year, and that increase in the assessed value would be limited to the tax caps.
Okay.
The rate at which you collect taxes goes down because you're collecting the same amount.
Right, I understand that's distributed, yes, I get that. I'm just trying to make sure from an education that we all, because it can be a little confusing, I
Right,
think.
we don't want to confuse the.
Correct. I think as simply as we can make it is the
Okay.
best.
Let's talk about new growth a little
Right.
farther, okay? A new business comes into town, and let's just say it has a value, and we're just tossing
Simple.
a number, $1 million. There are two things that can happen. The village's overall value goes up by $1 million, and the village's small tax rate then is applied to that $1 million, and that's the increase that we're going to see in our levy. If we did not increase
Right.
our levy, the value of that new business would allow the village's overall tax rate to come down, and people would benefit, residents would benefit from having their property tax level lowered by that decrease in the rate, but the village would receive no additional benefit from that new business coming into the community. I mean, sometimes with a new business, any new business, there are expenses associated with it. Maybe in some cases, it's additional traffic control. In some cases, maybe it's drainage or water issues. Some cases, depending on if it's a subdivision, it could be we have to plow more snow. But generally, from a new business, there are some additional costs that you would incur. So the new growth or the amount they allow you to increase your tax levy hopefully absorbs some of that. That's probably the easiest way I can explain it.
Michael, I thought we would be talking about the other taxes, not the new growth thing,
okay.
because there really isn't much to be gained out of that. But if you do not assess for the new growth, then the next year, that's computed in the equalized assessed value. So in essence, you collect more tax funds year two, even if you don't approve the new growth.
But nowhere near the amount I would if I captured in my levy the amount of the new growth in the initial.
Well, you
year.
missed the year one
Yes.
revenue. You don't miss
You
year
missed that.
two
You
revenue.
missed that jump. If any year, if you told me, Mike, let's take advantage of it when the new business hits the tax rolls, take it. Then if we don't want to take something or reduce it by a portion in the future years, at least I've captured the bulk of it. But so many times communities miss that opportunity, and that's what it is an opportunity, and once you miss it, it's not there for the taking.
So with this discussion, it says new revenue sources, budget. The only thing I'm seeing on here are increasing taxes, license fees, taxes. Do we have no other revenue sources for next year, new ones that we can gain other than taxing people?
Well, in the time that I've been here, one would always expect that you would see growth in the revenue sources that you currently have. That new growth hasn't been demonstrated here, and we're not alone. It's just, for whatever reason, even though there are a lot of good things that have happened in Gary, the surprising thing is always, you don't see it in a sales tax total. But I can explain part of that too, because generally those businesses that are coming in here, and we want all of them to continue to come, are businesses that people use every day, and they're already here in the village of Cary. So when a new one comes, someone has a choice. They may choose to go to the new one, but that just means they're not going to another one that's already here. And generally within a community like this, there is a lot of shopping that just gets done within the community. Those businesses that are going to make a difference to us are, if I could tell you I could plop a car dealer on a site, and we don't have any car dealers, I could guarantee you we'd look at $450,000 probably in sales tax that would be added to our tax rolls. Unfortunately, we don't have that. Any new business that is not an everyday business, Illinois Lift, perfect example, came into the village of Cary. We love to have more businesses like that, because those are not things that are going to be eaten up from other businesses in town. Those are businesses that are located here. The sales tax is going to come here, and many of the people who are buying it are not in the village of Cary. So they're helping reduce our tax burden, those people who are buying that equipment outside of town. For the most part, there's been little or no revenue growth. Looking out into the future, I could tell you, unless there's substantial new development and an increase in building permit fees, I don't see new growth coming from there. We are always looking here. The reverse of that is, of course, there's a general fund, there's $8 million of expenses. There is not a day goes by that we don't look at something coming through to say, do we really need to have this here? But I think the part that gets lost sometimes is our $8 million general fund budget is an operating budget. There are not a lot of capital items sitting in the general fund that we can look at and say, you know, we just won't do that this year. All of those projects reside in our capital projects budget. So generally, the capital items that you're going to see in the general fund are expenses that are less than $25,000. And generally, they're there because we need them for one reason or another. We will always look to reduce expenses, but it is hard with as few employees that we have on a full-time basis to figure out how we're going to reduce $700,000. And again, that's why we're talking about it
Well,
today.
we did reduce those some that we don't have on here too.
Yeah.
Right, so we have reduced some things just this year that would take down that 700, at least,
So,
right, I'm not.
We have, and you know, in the previous years too, we've made cuts. The last year made pretty significant cuts.
Right.
There just isn't a lot left for us to cut. I mean, going back to your point, Trustee Cavelli, and it's a good point. You look at the sales tax receipts that we've had here from 2000 to 2016. I mean, we've had a lot happen in that time. Our sales tax, though, it's gone from probably about $1 million in 2000 to present day, we're probably at around 1.3. So even with all that, you know, whatever's been developed here in 16, 17 years, we've only gone up in sales tax receipts by $300,000. It's not that much.
and the rate has stayed the same during that whole 16-year period. And that's not uncommon.
Right. I just look at it as it says we need to prioritize some development. I mean, I think I think we all would agree that everyone's going to say economic development is the key on some of the, as long as it's the proper, sustainable, income-producing development. You know, I have down here, prioritize development of Route 31, auto car dealership, you know, one or two, boy, wouldn't that be awesome? You know, we got maybe room right on there to get a nice, some car dealerships that people are having to travel to Barrington or Hoffman Estates for, whether it be an Audi or an Infiniti or a Lexus. There's a lot of those cars in this area that we just don't have car dealers here for. And to me, those are the only areas that would be potential is 31 to put something like that. I also thought about the cell tower. We had this whole discussion about where the revenue was going to come from that cell tower. And I know that was dismissed, but you know, I know it's going to come forward. I look at it and I say, one of the reasons that I don't want it going into private locations because I want the village to garner that revenue source from there, the revenue stream from there, no matter what it is. I think we have to try and optimize on those opportunities. in addition to these other ones. It's just some of my thoughts.
It's a big number,
Yeah, it is.
and it takes some time to put that plan together so that we're not faced with that hole.
So what's the plan moving forward if none of these taxes pass?
Well, go ahead.
If the board isn't, I mean, I'm recommending that we look at some of these. I mean, you heard me, the eating establishment tax. That's not something that I'm in support of, but natural gas utility tax, cable franchise fee, I do think we need to strongly look at that. I don't think it's a matter of, if we do, but when we do it. If we want to prove anything, then we have to look at some of these other funds. We've talked about it before, the revolving loan fund. We'd have to look at the land conservancy fund. We'd have to look at even the building fund, and moving dollars out of those. But that only lasts so long. So, we could fix the problem with that this year, but then every other year, it's not going to stay at 700,000. With the cost of personnel and insurance and commodities, that number is going to continue to grow. So I don't recommend that we use those one-time dollars to fix the problem. We have to try to fix it with recurring revenues.
We've also talked with fellow municipalities, through McCog and Northwest Municipal Conference about some of the mandated ridiculousness from our state, including this. We were told that they were going to leave our LGDF alone, which was unforeseen, and they threw that in the table. But in the same sense, too, in several of the meetings that we've had in the last couple of years with regards to our police pension fund and the process of getting it to 95% funded by 2040, is it? And that is a ridiculous goal. It's a noble goal to have, but it's crippling a lot of communities. And I was wondering what your thoughts are. Perhaps you can do some sort of a spreadsheet with, if, coming up with like a 65%, 75, 80, just to see, because that's a big number that we're looking at in this budget and within the deficit, because that continues to rise. It's something that is unsustainable for a lot of communities. And, we can gear up again and hit the state with regards to this, because that would be just a change with them and what their policies are. And we've talked about this in the Capitol. So if we start moving and show, that you're increasing our abilities to do things for our local residents because of a mandate that you have for our pension fund. I get that. And then you're going to take away the LGDF, which you said you would never take away. So now they're doing that. So it's time that we start letting them know how crippling this is for us. And I've talked to a lot of other municipalities are going through the exact same thing. And it starts with working with our state representatives and coming up with a rational way that we can combat these issues and, continuously promote growth within our own community, encourage new, people to come in, but at the same time, being able to be, fiscally conservative with these things. But, it's crippling. So my question to you is, can you come up with some calculations, over maybe the next 5 years, if we were to reduce that 95% in 5% increments down or whatever, what you think it would be normal? There was a couple of finance people in Springfield that were talking about that. It was a ridiculous notion to begin with. So
I can tell you, yes, the number is easy enough to get from our actuary. They'd be more than willing to calculate that number. They'd be more than willing to come here and talk to you about it. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of, other than knowing the number, we wouldn't have the ability to reduce our police pension levy. Because basically we have two choices, and we've had this discussion before too. We can either fund based on the Department of Insurance report that is provided for all police pension funds, or we can have an independent actuary run the calculation, and we have to fund at either the independent actuary's number or that Department of Insurance number. We wouldn't be able to fund at 95% of it or 80% of it, because they'd be coming back to us saying that we're not in compliance with the statute.
Well, which is what we were talking about, working with the rest of the municipalities, is to getting them to change that. So that's why I was just kind of wondering if we just had some rough numbers on what it would be, and, we can ring these people up and.
Oh, without a doubt. Matter of fact, as part of our process this year, the plan was to have the actuary come here, make a presentation, and we'll add that to the list of the numbers that they can provide to the village board. Because I would agree with you, it is a substantial number, and they basically told us our number at the present rate will continue to go up by $100,000 a year for the next 3 or 4 years.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
You bet.
Any other questions for Michael with regards to this?
So that
Thank you
one-
for the sobering information.
The 1% of like 1% sales tax, is that something that has to go to referendum if we reduce?
An additional sales tax, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it would.
And we'd probably want to save that for something more,
Big, substantial.
yeah, targeted.
Is there any history as to why the Village of Cary has not implemented the gas tax? I mean, you look at the list, everybody else has been doing it for years. Why in the past years that's been passed? Is there any documentation on it, or just?
I'm not aware of anything. I mean, as you saw in there, municipalities have approved it over the years. Some more recently, some it goes back probably into the 80s.
Many of them imposed it with the economy, with the downturn in the economy. Some people imposed them because they needed to fund a bond issue. It's generally a fairly large dedicated revenue source that somebody can commit to making debt service payments for a period of time.
I think the overall message here is that we're going to have to make some tough decisions. Want to continue to get the information in front of you so that you're able to make the best tough decision that we can. I understand it's not what we want to hear. It's the facts. It's the reality. We have a significant deficit, and we're going to have to work to solve that problem. We're in it together here. That's what it comes down to. So we're going to, Finance Director DeSharm and I are planning on circling back here and giving a 6-month budget overview to the Committee of the Whole in October. We're going to talk about this again with the Village Board. Be happy to talk to individuals one-on-one about this, get some more feedback on it. But I'd like to get some direction too from the Village Board about these individual taxes, one-off items.
Thank you, Michael. Now we'll move into a discussion for the solicitor permit ordinance. Chief?
Thank you. We had a discussion maybe a meeting or two ago in regards to the solicitor ordinance and solicitor permits as it relates to the manner in which they're issued and our enforcement of the ordinance, the solicitor ordinance. So I figured it would be in our best interest to first discuss our ordinance first, so you had a complete understanding of what we approve as, what we define as soliciting, and then the application process, the number that we approve or actually review, and then any enforcement actions that we can take as it relates to that. And then there was also some discussion about some type of permit fee, and there's some information in the packet in regards to some area municipalities and the fees that they assess for solicitor permits. But first, when we talk about soliciting, we're talking about someone going to generally a residence and asking for money for something in exchange. Interestingly enough, we exempt sales of books, periodicals, and other publications and subscriptions. And when I did some research on this, it looked like it was a 1960s case, and it was Osborne versus Village of River Forest. My only guess is that it was, we didn't want to regulate speech. That would be my guess. So when we're talking about solicitors, we're talking about someone that goes to residence and asks for something for money. Now, all of our solicitors have to make application to the police department. We have an application that they have to fill out, and it's processed by our records clerks. We process approximately a little over 100 a year, and we get them sometimes one off. We have one individual that gets one every month, and he does like home repairs. And I have 13 sitting on my desk today. We have an energy company that wants to do some soliciting. And the criteria that we look at is that they have to not have been convicted of a violation of a similar provision of a soliciting permit. All that is a question that they answer on the application. And then the second criteria is that they couldn't have been convicted of a felony under under the Illinois state statutes or any other state or federal law. Now, when we talk about the felony conviction, in a later part in that solicitor ordinance, it indicates that it has to be within 5 years. So now we look at the felony conviction within 5 years of the date of application. After that, we issue them, and this is something that we can discuss as well, is our permit is a piece of paper, it's a certificate. It doesn't have anything other than the person's name on it that identifies that individual. I have worked in other places where it's a little bit more elaborate, and there's at least a picture on it so that you can correlate the permit to the individual. But again, that costs some funds as it relates to perhaps purchasing some equipment to do that. The other part of this equation is once we issue these permits, the individuals can go out and solicit, but they have to obey any signs that the resident has erected or applied as it relates to no solicitors invited. And that has to be displayed at the primary entrance to the residence. So if they don't adhere to that, then that individual is in violation of our ordinance, and the resident can call the police department and we'll respond. And our enforcement action is generally it's not generally, it is an administrative adjudications notice or violation. So they would come to this room and we have a hearing officer, and they would hear the merits of that particular incident and determine whether or not there was a violation of the ordinance. The most that someone can be fined for that is $750. We can't take them into custody for that. It's in essence the same as or similar to a parking citation. That's our enforcement in regards to that. In regards to why we can do this or why we can regulate this is because the state of Illinois has allowed municipalities to do that. And I believe I included that as in the packet as well, so that we do have the authority to regulate that. And what's interesting about that is that it says that we can license, tax, regulate, or prohibit. But my guess is that someone would come and challenge us, and this is just me guessing, on the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, that we are somehow hindering commerce if we prohibit it wholly. There are municipalities that regulate it based on certain types of soliciting, like they'll regulate it or not require it from maybe a youth-based organization, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, things of that nature. But what we can't do is we can't, and I'm certain that Attorney Simon could elaborate on this further, is we can't regulate speech. So we can't prohibit people from going door to door for like religious organizations. So that's another, and I'm certain that political speech is another one that we couldn't regulate.
Pamphleteering, where they're not asking for money, where they're just informing you. Someone's going door to door asking for signatures on a petition or looking to generate, community information about an issue of local concern. Information distribution, written or printed, that is protected by the First Amendment.
Basically, if you're not asking for money, they can pretty much do that. But finally, our ordinance provides some direction from in the past in regards to when this was established or enacted, and that is that at that time, the village board indicated that it will be the occupant will make the determination whether or not solicitors shall or shall not be invited to their respective residents. So that means that I don't my reading on that is that it's not necessarily the village or the police department that would be a gatekeeper for solicitors. It would be the individual residents or resident that would be the individual that would make the decision whether or not they wanted to invite people to solicit at their residence. So I kind of wrap up with that, and I would entertain, and the other thing I did is, I think I already told you this, but there's some fees that are all over the map as it relates to solicitor permits in there. I think the highest one I saw was $500, and then, there are municipalities like Cary that don't charge anything for a solicitor permit. I'd be open to any discussion, questions, or some direction if you wanted us to look at amending the solicitor ordinance.
I was interested in seeing that it says until 8 PM. I don't know how the board feels, but I thought that was kind of late. Didn't know if we could change that to earlier.
There is case law out there
There's case law?
that it doesn't specify 8 PM, but if you set the rules in such a way that it significantly frustrates their ability to actually see people at their house. So if you said you're allowed to solicit in town from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and you say that in recognition of the fact that most people work from 9 to 5, that rule would be designed to frustrate people's ability to solicit. And that would potentially violate their rights to engage in protected activity. So while 8 p.m. is not a specific rule, I would just advise you to make sure that the time that you allow people to solicit recognizes when people have a chance to be at home.
But if Attorney Simon, if we wanted to, or if the village board decided to drop it down to say 6 PM, I mean, that would probably still would fall within that general window of when people would be at home.
That seems reasonable. I would have to, I can't guarantee that that's a perfectly reasonable thing, but it seems reasonable.
Sure.
I'd prefer that time change, just having younger kids myself, and I'm trying to put them down to bed. There's nothing that irks me more than at 7:30, the doorbell ringing. Also, I would be interested in looking at fining solicitors, because I do think it takes up staff time to process these permits. So I think we need to take that into account when we're looking at permitting solicitors.
Then I would ask, what is a reasonable amount to charge a fee for a solicitor permit?
And I'd probably throw it back at you and say, what do you think is reasonable? Because how much staff time does it take? And I do think the picture is a good idea because, I can claim myself to be somebody and easily hand it over and no one would be any of the wiser. I don't think we need to buy anything elaborate, but I do think a picture is a good idea. So I don't know how long staff would take to process something like that. So that's why I would say, what do you think would be reasonable?
If you're looking at, I would,
Chief, what's the general penalty provision in the code? Is there a 0 to 750?
well, no, there's a specific, I think this is 75. I think if they were to pay it in lieu of prosecution, I believe that this would be $75. But if they were to come to administrative adjudication hearing, then the hearing officer would have the authority to fine up to $750.
And when you check for felony convictions, are they getting printed?
It's a question on the application.
Okay, so if they say no, there's really no way to check.
Right.
We're just
And-
taking them at their word.
Yes, we are. And then the other part of that equation, I mean, we do get a copy of their driver's license and things of that nature. But the other thing that we do as it relates to, it's hard to do a criminal, background investigation on somebody if it's not related to employment or big brothers, big sisters, or things of that nature. Now, we do it for liquor license applications and the tow operators, is we're getting a ORI, which is our speak for the originating authority or agency, to get certain information for tow operators, because we can check them, and our ordinance does suggest that we should do background investigations on our tow operators. But no, Now, I will also tell you that I've been here 3.5 years, and I've only revoked one solicitor permit, and that was because they violated the ordinances related to going to residents that had the, no solicitor invited sign, and that they were willing to call us, and we issued them the citation, and I suspended them until they could go to a hearing. And then the other part of this equation is the word is convicted. So from the point that they violated to the point that we have our hearing, I think that that's kind of a gray area as it relates to my authority to be able to revoke that permit.
And I think a lot of people are reluctant. We had solicitors in our neighborhood last night, and I know they did come up to some of the doors. I don't think anyone called. I think a lot of times people feel they're bothering the police department.
No, that's what we are here for.
And then actually, one of my neighbors asked me about, I guess, is there some subdivisions that have a no soliciting sign that would be for the entire subdivision when you pull in to the subdivision?
You know
Is
what?
that an association?
That's an association.
Okay.
That would be an association. That wouldn't necessarily be the municipality. Municipality has the ability and the authority to regulate them within, like a village of Cary or any other village. It would be up to the municipality to regulate that. Now, what I have seen is that there have been apartment complexes that have posted no solicitors invited for the whole complex. So that would apply to that complex.
So if somebody doesn't have an association, I'm just trying to remember what we talked about a long time ago. So I thought you said that the subdivision would have to have majority of the vote, like of the residents, to get no soliciting sign, and that it would have to be posted on a stop sign or regulatory
No,
sign.
we couldn't do that at all.
Okay.
But the department does provide the signs or stickers, both, for a window application or on the door, that complies with our ordinance that says no solicitors invited. And if you put that on there, what you're basically saying is blanket, you don't want any solicitors to approach your resident to ring the doorbell when the kids are trying to go down.
And then can we change the ordinance to include, to make it so that magazine sales, subscriptions, books, all that kind of stuff can still have a background check on them as well? And
Nope.
we can't change that?
We can't do that. Not to my knowledge.
The phrase that the law uses is called a prior restraint. And so if the regulations are so odious that it results in a prior restraint on someone's ability to exercise their First Amendment rights, then there has to be a compelling governmental interest and it has to be the least restrictive way of accomplishing that interest. And so background checks as a prerequisite to First Amendment activities have generally been frowned upon.
For magazine subscriptions?
Yes.
Okay. And then I know Trustee McAlpine had asked in the past and just had a concern about, kids, wanting to make sure that, kids aren't, if they want to sell snow service in the wintertime or something like that. Obviously, that's not something that you guys are obviously going to, I'm guessing, go after. You guys said you would use discretion, meaning that you wouldn't go after.
Discretion is one thing. You have to craft the ordinance so that it exempts that type of activity. So I think you could craft an ordinance that addresses certain organizations as a blanket. For example, youth-based organizations and their primary fundraising activity. So like selling cookies or
popcorn.
Yeah, exactly, things of that nature.
Those coupon cards, they go door to door.
Right, because you have high schoolers.
But I think when you do those one-off exceptions, you can get yourself into a problem in a hurry. Maybe I'm saying that wrong, but there's always an issue when you exempt someone out and you don't have, and it appears to be arbitrary and capricious.
The categories have to be content neutral.
Well, I mean, and I get all the concern. I think it's really important, that we have discussions like this when we're concerned about it. But there is something about the free market. And what I mean by that is that if solicitors come in, and while I may not want to buy a magazine subscription, I wouldn't do it. I'll just be honest. I'm from someone at my door. But they're not going to continue unless there is a want for it somewhere. If they came to our town and nobody was buying their services, they wouldn't be here. So while even all of us might say, hey, I have no interest in that, there could be residents that's their opportunity and they are utilizing services like that. So I don't want to also hamper someone's ability if they do enjoy someone coming in and doing that. I personally don't, but.
What's wrong with our existing ordinance? What do you see from past experiences that you think that we should be considering? It seems like there's a lot of variables here that are hit or miss. And, from your perspective, I look at it from just when people show up at my door, who's got the permit? Do each solicitor have to have the permit?
Yeah, it's a permit that's issued to the individual. But as I've indicated, it's a certificate. It doesn't have any identifying marks other than the individual's name, so you'd have to ask for a secondary piece of identification to determine if that certificate belongs to that individual. So
it typically doesn't happen, though. I mean, they say, well, my boss has it, and they drop off their van full of kids that go door to door. Each one of those kids, do they have to have their certificate to prove that they've gone through the permitting process? And, that's, where do we?
Depending on
how do
how
we
you
enforce
craft
that?
it in regards to exempting out, certain maybe youthful activities versus, businesses or, established, organizations that are soliciting funds.
I don't know if we're going to find the perfect ordinance with this. I think a perfect example here, is the research that the chief did related to, the fees. I mean, they're all over the board. And it just comes down to, what works for us, what works for the village of Cary here. What are we looking for? And I think that's what we're seeking here is, what is the village board looking for? Are we looking to modify anything? I know we talked about a little bit about the time and maybe the fees. That's the direction that Chief and I are looking for.
So Chief, if I heard you correctly though, you're saying how many problems do we have with this? I mean, how many calls is the police department having to handle? Just so I get a rough idea.
Maybe 10 to 15 a year as it relates, and some of those are based on solicitors that didn't get a permit.
Okay.
So, we wouldn't know that they were out there until someone complained about them. So, yeah, it's kind of a hit and miss. Like,
Sure.
for example, we're going to have a group of people doing soliciting here after I review these applications. And just like, a cross-section of society, there are some good solicitors and there are some more,
Sure.
Forceful solicitors, and we'll get complaints about that. The thing I keep on going back to is that the resident controls everything in this.
Right.
So if they don't want to be bothered by the solicitors, put the no solicitor invited sign on your residence, the primary entrance to your residence, number one. And then number two, if someone violates it, call us. Because that's the only way we'll know that it's occurring. And you have to call me, or not me, don't call me. Call us relatively quickly after it occurs, because we'd like to catch that individual or identify the individual, at least close to when we get that report.
Are they allowed to ask for the ID
Absolutely.
so they can take the name down?
Well, they can ask for a permit because they have to have the permit with them.
Right, they can't keep the permit though.
No, they couldn't revoke the permit on their own volition.
Right, so what exactly are you looking for here from us, Jake?
I'm looking for us to charge a fee for permits. It does take up some staff time processing it, and then even when they're getting calls on it. So I'd like to see us capture some of that back.
I've heard fees and I've heard time so far.
Time meaning
I like what Foxford Grove has, the $25 a permit, valid for 30 days.
And that's what we issue our permits for, 30 days. So it, and that does seem to be the number that hits on most often is the $25. You know, and when you look at this kind of at first blush, sometimes it depends on what you're doing the $25 for, though, because Algonquin is $25 a day, and, you know, other agencies are either $25, you know, valid for a permit for 30 days, which is exactly what you're speaking of, and that's Fox River Grove.
Yeah. The other thing I think we can do too is that if we know a slew of them's coming in, like for example, you know, hey, get ready, they're coming, we could put that in the Cary Weekly News blast to let people know, hey, be prepared. You know, they're coming out for,
Yeah,
or
we-
we've issued permits or something. Is
We
that
try to get
reasonable?
out in front of that. Chief does a pretty good job
Right.
of letting us know so that when we do have a big issuance, we can send something out.
Sure.
What we won't do is say that it's this organization that's coming out.
Sure.
We will just put something that's educational.
Correct.
For example, you know, if there's a company that is doing pest control, we'll indicate, you know, that we don't, you know, that there might, we could educate people in regards to, you know, maybe the solicitor's permits generally, and then, you know, maybe go into some specifics as it relates to, you're not, you know, we don't require it, we don't support any of.
Right, we're
you know,
not endorsing, we're not
The issuance of
endorsing
a solicitor permit does not indicate that we endorse.
Correct.
The individual or the organization.
So I'm hearing that we should look at the fee then. So maybe staff goes back and we can look at the fee and bring back an ordinance here for the village board to consider.
Can we ask the board about the time too?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
You like 7 o'clock instead of 8?
Anything earlier would be great.
Okay.
I think 7 o'clock is reasonable.
Okay. So I'm hearing $25 and 7 o'clock
For 30
Going
days.
once?
for 30
Going
days.
twice?
Right, no, I appreciate the direction, and this is a relatively easy fix.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief. Now a discussion on parking regulations.
By the way, if you ever have to do a presentation, have Eric do it for
Yes.
you. Because if I was doing this on my own, I'm telling you, it would be black and white. That's all it would be. But what he came up
Stick
with is
figures.
very good. You know, I can't, well, it's green, number one. I did go out and take pictures, though, so
Way to
that's
go.
something, yeah, I get some credit here. But Eric did the bulk of making it look good, so I appreciate working. Anytime I can work with Eric, I appreciate that. So what we're really here to talk about is our current parking inquiry process. That is how we receive comments or complaints from people. Eric is going to focus on the typical residential street classification, specifically by width, and we'll talk about the issues and concerns that individuals have transmitted to the village as it relates to the ability to maneuver specifically bigger vehicles through some of these areas. And then what we would be looking for is, you know, to have you direct us in regards to a potential village-wide criteria so that we're not arbitrary when we talk about restricting these or trying to address a concern or complaint from a resident as it relates to parking. The first thing that we spoke about was how we get this. And the first thing, when we get a complaint, and generally we get them one-off. We don't get a group of people complaining necessarily. However, there was an exception, and that would have been Second Street and Sunset. When I first started here, there was a lot of concern about the roadways and their restricted nature as it related to vehicles being parked on both sides. We came up with a resolution that we would restrict parking on the fire hydrant sides of those roadways. So now there's only vehicles parked on one side of the roadway. And it seems to have satisfied, or that seems to be a very good solution in that area. For a little bit, we had some complaints, and, people were upset about the changes, but now it's become second nature, and I believe that it's worked out best, and I know that one of the organizations or concerns that were expressed to me were school bus drivers. They're having some difficulty getting down those roadways because of the nature of the roadway and the width of their vehicle. So when we get a complaint, we generally go to data collection. We'll look at the average daily volume of that, there it is, the average daily volume of that roadway. We'll look at our crash history. We're able to go back and look at the traffic crash reports that we've taken. We'll look at the roadway configuration and see if there's anything special as it relates to line of sight issues, elevation, maybe the nature in which the roadways intersect, if it's not 90 degrees, if it's some other angle, things of that nature. Other parking generators, adjacent land uses. This is specifically important when we start talking about parking restrictions near athletic fields. And we have a subdivision that has some regulation as it relates to parking in those subdivisions that are adjacent to two athletic fields that are separated by significant difference, but the regulation that we have indicates that whenever there's a event occurring there, you can't park there, which doesn't make a lot of sense because you wouldn't know it if you're on the other side of the subdivision. So we have to look at those, and then we'll go out and observe. So we'll look at this. Eric and I have done this on a couple of occasions, specifically near the schools. And I think the last time we did it was on Crystal Lake Avenue. Then we take all this information and we analyze it, and then we apply some different standards to it. We use something called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I found another publication that I asked Eric about, and that's the Bureau of Streets and Roads and Streets for the Illinois Department of Transportation. That indicates new design as it relates to how wide a roadway should be and how much distance you should have or width for like a parking lane and things of that nature. And we do this as a collaborative effort. So Eric and I sit down, we'll look at all this information. Eric has a very good background in traffic engineering, and we'll come up with some recommendations and we'll present it to you for action. And then we implement it, and that generally requires us to do something as it relates to maybe education or directed patrol. Some agencies might call it selective traffic enforcement programs. We call it direct patrol here, and we'll tell people, our officers, that they need to spend X amount of time during a certain time period at a particular area if there's an issue as it relates to traffic or parking or things of that nature. And then if it warrants it, we may have to expend additional funds to maybe improve a roadway, as we're doing on Georgetown now, to make it a safer roadway. And that's the end of my presentation as it relates to this, and I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
All right, thanks, Chief. And so basically these are unofficial classes, but what we have in the Village of Cary are more or less 4 different categories of roadways. The first 2 are typically the newer streets and comprise the vast majority of our streets. So a lot of those subdivisions were built in the 80s, 90s, and beyond. So roads you'll see are the very wide roads, over 34 foot wide. In those cases, when cars are parked on both sides of the streets, you'll have room in the middle for two-way traffic to continue on. And then it goes down the list as the roads get narrower. Obviously, you have different impacts with regards to the ability for bigger fire apparatus, which in Cary, with the Fire Protection District, can be as wide as 10 foot 4 inches wide. Now, that's certain pieces of their equipment. I would say the vast majority of their equipment are large trucks. School buses, garbage trucks are more in the neighborhood of 8.5 foot wide. So as an example, at least visually, this is a work in progress as we update our GIS databases, but you can kind of see by color, the pink and the blue are the roads that are more or less matching the current standards, where residential streets are no narrower than, say, 26 foot wide and up and width to probably the widest residential streets we have in town, like West Main Street, Cimarron, Georgetown, which are 40 to 42 feet wide. Parking issues when cars are parked on both sides can occur in those streets still. I would say probably more than half of the requests that we've investigated within the past 3 years that I've been working with Chief Finland probably are on those streets that are more in the neighborhood of 26 foot wide. But specifically, the challenges especially come into play on these roads that are less than that. As I mentioned, the big streets, not so much of an issue. This is West Main Street, west of Algonquin Road. You can see two-way traffic fits when cars are parked on both sides. And the recent striping improvements even further delineate that. Usually the narrower the residential streets, but still the modern standards, 26, 28 feet is what most of those streets are. So here's a 26-foot wide example of Crest Drive, just just south of Three Oaks Road. You can see even with cars parked on both sides, and we give some allowance in our numbering here for the positioning of the parked cars. Each car is not always going to be parked right against the curb. Sometimes they're a little bit off. Sometimes they're a little bit wider, pickup truck versus a small compact car like you see on the left side of the photo. But generally speaking, a school bus and even a large fire apparatus is going to fit down the middle when cars are parked on both sides. Now that can change if there's a whole series of cars parked consistently and together. So that can obviously lead to cars having to take turns as they travel through those roadways, depending on just the nature of the neighborhood and the property owners, whether or not they have a lot of vehicles and a lot of guests, or there's traffic generators like parks that Chief Finland mentioned. Now here we're getting to the second tier of the narrower streets. So we do have a number of streets in this category, about, depending on if you consider some of the cul-de-sacs, between 30 and 37 of our streets are in this category. So here's an example of a 24-foot wide street. This is Pearl Street, west of Montana, in the middle of town. And again, if this particular road does not have barrier curbs, it has the ribbon curbs or the rural cross section. It wasn't proved to have the ribbon curb recently with our road programs. So it does give the cars an opportunity to move off the road a little bit. They can keep two wheels on the pavement and be legally parked, but then provide more room. But if they do stay all on the pavement as shown here, which again is perfectly legal as well, you have marginal room for these larger vehicles to fit when there's cars parked on both sides. In this case, if that large engine that the district has that's about 10.5 foot wide, it would be a challenge depending on what's parked there. And then the last class is the narrowest of the roads. We only have about a dozen or so of these types of streets in one of the oldest parts of town, typically in rural cross sections. And they obviously are so narrow that if cars parked on one side, as you see here, we do have sufficient room for emergency vehicles to fit and school buses to fit, but it's physically not possible for two cars to park side by side and have any through traffic go through. So our different options that the chief and I have come up for your consideration and looking for some direction to see if you prefer us to pursue one or another. First, obviously, is no change at all in the policy or procedure. Benefits would be that obviously there's only changes that are made in the isolated areas where requests are made or staff identifies a particular issue that needs to be addressed. Challenges, obviously, as you saw through the process that we go through for each of these, it does take a decent amount of staff time and analysis, depending on our workload. Some of these do get in a bit of a queue and do sit for a bit before we're able to get to them, depending on what our other priorities happen to be for the day of the week or the month. But nonetheless, it does take some resources in-house. And then secondly, obviously, there's potential impacts for the emergency access in particular, not to mention the other trucks that do go through town. First option, besides keeping the current process in place, would be to enact or consider enacting restrictions for parking on one side of the street for all of our basically non-collector roadways. We don't recommend this. Obviously, as you saw in that previous exhibit with the pink and the blue streets in that map, that's a huge percentage of our streets. We don't feel it would be practical from a implementation process or from a cost-wise. That'd be a whole lot of signs that we'd have to install. Other challenges obviously would be that I think the convenience of the neighborhoods, especially in areas where there isn't a significant frequency or volume of on-street parking, some residents might feel they're unnecessarily restricted and inconvenienced by that broad change. Next tier down would just be to take off all those Class 2 roadways and just look at the narrowest roads, so the ones that are 24 feet and less in width. So these are the roads that either don't allow trucks to pass when cars are parked on both sides, or the ones that marginally allow them to pass. It's good because it proactively ensures emergency vehicle access on these narrow streets. It does reduce our staff time somewhat because we do have a set policy and procedure in place for these conditions. And there are also definitely fewer streets and fewer signs that we'd have to implement and install. There's still a number of them, obviously. There's about 40, 50 streets in total of varying lengths. Some may only require a sign or two, but it's something that is more manageable and could be phased. The challenge is, as with the previous option, there could be a perception of being inconvenienced on the neighborhood's part, if you're especially on the side of the street that happens to be restricted. The last option would be just to only focus on the very narrow roads, so that Class 4 roads that are 20 feet and less in width. Similar benefits and challenges, but obviously you have far fewer streets, only a dozen or so, and but benefits, obviously, that we're taking care of probably the areas where the access is most severely hampered if these parking conditions occur. So our recommendation would be to look at option 3 if the committee so directs us to, just to see what I guess the potential implications would be. We can get some resident feedback and craft a phased approach to this implementation and bring it back to the village board for consideration. And with that, the chief and I can answer any questions or and get your feedback, please.
And I did provide you an article from the Daily Herald from online. Interestingly enough, I am acquainted with Chief Gunther, and I asked him yesterday about how that came to be, and his impetus was to reinstate prohibitions for overnight parking. So he was looking at prohibiting parking from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. It also would help the parking on the roadways for extended periods of time. What he found was that 32 out of 36 municipalities in Lake County that he looked at prohibited overnight parking. So when I did something similar for Crystal Lake, Algonquin, Huntley, Lake in the Hills, McHenry City, and Woodstock, as it relates to overnight parking, they all prohibit it, and we're the only municipality that allows overnight parking. But that's another discussion for another day, I would think. But that was why that article was put in there, because they were talking about narrow streets and their inability to maneuver large pieces of vehicles or apparatus down those streets. The other thing that we didn't touch on, and we meant to, was the fact that there are some streets in Cary that do not have sidewalks. I have received complaints from individuals that live on, for example, High Road. It doesn't have a sidewalk, so now you have individuals walking in the street with without a restriction in regards to where cars are parked, so they're walking around cars on those roadways as well.
And High Road is a Class 3 road that would be restricted with staff's recommendation.
Yes, that particular road, I believe, is about 24, 25 feet wide. So,
It is.
and there are some Class 2 roads that are,
Class 2, I think.
yeah, there are some roads that are 26, 28 feet wide with no sidewalk, where just because of the nature of people walking on the street, a restriction to one side of the road could be warranted if requested to be analyzed or if recommended by the board or by staff.
Eric?
Oh, it is 3.
Would your recommendation supersede existing special rules or just supplement the existing special rules that are in place for specific streets?
We would be looking to add to the current list of parking restrictions and obviously update locations where it's in conflict or add additional restrictions.
So there were special rules put in place
Generally
recently.
supplementing.
Supplements?
Yeah, supplement, because, for example, school, school's getting ready to start. There are restrictions in regards to parking around particularly the high school. So this would be in addition to that, because those restrictions are generally based on hours.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we would do is we would restrict the fire hydrant side of the streets if fire hydrants existed, so that there would be access for the fire department.
Director Morimoto, can you, on the slide that we're looking at here, point out, so what staff's recommendation is as far as the color of the streets, which ones would be restricted?
Yes, so the narrow streets that we'd be talking about, what we refer to as class 3 and 4, would be orange and then the green. I'm gonna advance a bit just to blow it up section by section. So again, the north side of town, it's predominantly newer development. So there aren't as many narrow streets. The exception would be the Bright Oaks subdivision. And obviously you can see there's a lot of streets with no sidewalks. That's what those white dashes are referring to. And forgive you, some of the, like I mentioned, there's some old data that we haven't had time yet to scrub. So some of these sidewalk identifiers are a little bit outdated, but I'll point those out as we come upon them. So between Three Oaks Road and Route 14, it's generally the middle of town, you have a combination of, as the town grew, the middle along Route 14, and by Silver Lake Road is older vintage. So you see more of the orange streets that we're talking about and some of the green streets. The green, again, being the most narrow, and the orange being 22 to 24 foot wide. So we would be recommending that we start investigating these areas that are in the orange and the green.
Yeah.
And then as you move southward, the Brigadoon subdivision around downtown is an odd mixture of wider and narrow roads, an odd mixture of some with sidewalks, some without sidewalks. So High Road, you can kind of see, you probably can't, my cursor's here. This is High Road. It starts in downtown and goes all the way, kind of the bottom southern perimeter of that subdivision. The west side of town is all newer and is all wider streets. This is the Fox River neighborhoods, Mildred, Marquette, Cary Avenue, and then the Cary Point Industrial Park's in the mix there too, but already it's currently restricted for parking on both sides. And then lastly, this one, there is sidewalk actually all around Fox Trails now. So that one white line is outdated, but only Fox Trails Drive is actually about 22 foot wide. The rest of them are 26 foot wide.
Chief, there's been some problems in some of these areas in the last couple of years, right? You know, these class 3 areas. I know like on James and Margaret, there's been complaints about both sides. We've had this discussion about how to enforce both, who is at fault for restricting the roadway with 2 cars parked there.
And it's hard to do that if someone parks on one side and then someone parks adjacent to them and you reduce the roadway to under 18 feet, I believe, and then who do you cite? Well, you'd have to cite both of them or no one. So yes, there's been some issues in regards to that. And then the other thing I did investigate is with Director Simons, and that was what is a required code as it relates to parking spots per residence. And it hasn't changed in a long time, and it's just 2 spots. So all that is required when residence is built is that there's 2 off-street parking spots per residence.
And those 2 are inclusive of the garage. So if you had no outdoor driveway parking, but you had 2 spaces in a garage, that would meet the code requirement.
Okay.
So your recommendation is option 3?
And yes, and that's not necessarily to fully enact that. This time it's to, I think, investigate further. We haven't done any resident feedback. We haven't refined the dollar amounts and the actual impacts yet. But we wanted to get some feedback from the committee before we did expend that staff time to kind of refine what the ultimate recommendation or process would be.
Those are two good points. I like the resident feedback and, what this is going to cost as far as signage. But in general, I know there are areas on these Class 3 roads that are constant problems, and it needs to be addressed.
Right. I agree with option 3. I think that's the way to go.
I like option 3 too.
I'm going to go with staff recommendation.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the feedback, and that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you. Any other department head updates since the last hour? Anything happened? Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned.
Oh, really?